Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Again, my apologies for last week not being able to join you all. It just wasn't physically possible with where I was at, but obviously I'm much better now. So thank you all for your thoughts and prayers, and hopefully keep fingers crossed everything will continue fine. All right. So Mary, if you would put the prayers on, Jana has offered to lead us in the prayers. So I'm gonna actually turn off.
Oh, okay.
Let me pause this while we do the prayers because Jana will lead them. Okay, go ahead.
Me?
To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. We'll do the short mandala offering one time in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this is a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. And we'll do refuge and bodhicitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kyap suchi dagi chunyen gi pe sonam gi drola penchir sangye drupar shog sangye chodang soki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kyap suchi dagi chunyen gi pe sonam gi Drola Penchir Sangye Drupar Shog.
Okay, let's go ahead and start with a short meditation. Thank you, Jana, for leading the prayers. So just find a comfortable position for meditation. We're going to do the first few minutes of just focusing on the breath in order to calm our minds a bit, come into this space. And then I'll lead you in a very short reflection to set motivation. All right. So again, just do whatever technique with the breath that you prefer over these first few minutes. So now to set our motivation, I thought it would be useful to go through these 3 recollections that are the first 3 of the 6 that I covered a few weeks ago. We haven't gotten to the 6th yet, but the first 3 we did talk about rather extensively. Let's first think about them in terms of these external supports in our practice. The Buddhas, the fully developed beings who have all these amazing qualities that we discussed. They've fully developed their minds, have completely removed all their negative tendencies, all the obscurations. They're in the perfect position to guide us, to lead us. Just recollect these amazing qualities of the Buddhas and develop some faith and confidence that the Buddhas are there all the time, there to help us. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, we're never alone. The Buddhas are always here. And then the Dharma, we recollect the Dharma because it has the perfect qualities of an ideal medicine. Like the Buddha is the doctor who knows exactly what our malady, our ailment exactly is, and then gives us the perfect medicine. The Dharma is the scriptures, the teachings of the Buddha initially that we need to have in order to accomplish the Dharma of realization. But again, when we have these as an external support, it's primarily the teachings, such as what we're going through in this course. And just feel and so grateful that you have the Dharma in your life. You have met with these teachings that help you and all beings to actualize our deepest potential. And then we recollect the Sangha. And the Sangha are specifically those beings who have generated deeper realizations of the Dharma, particularly the wisdom realizing emptiness, selflessness, the true paths that lead to the true cessations. Those beings have taken the medicine of the Dharma and incorporated it into their minds. They are a valuable source of reliance for us because they know the Dharma at that level. They can be like our assistants, helping us to take the medicine. So we recollect these 3 in terms of the external elements, the way in which we depend upon things outside ourselves. And the Buddha like the doctor, the Dharma like the medicine, the Sangha like the assistants who help us to practice to use the medicine. But the whole goal is to accomplish these ourselves, to become the realization of the Dharma, to accomplish true paths and true cessations in our own minds, and thereby become the Sangha jewel, to be able to help others on their path until we eventually become the Buddha jewel. And in the state of Buddhahood, we can then work perfectly for others without any impairment or fault. So when we recollect the 3 jewels externally, they're a reflection of our own potential. And as we set our motivation, we generate the wish to actualize these 3 jewels in our own mindset, to be able to become the 3 jewels for others. And this is what bodhicitta is the sincere wish to be able to fully develop ourselves so we can then help others. It's for this reason that we've gathered here together tonight to continue our study of this profound text. All right. Okay, you can open your eyes fully and we'll begin. So again, we haven't gotten too far into this text. This is really only our 3rd class together on this, but the initial part of this text, again, is working with some teachings that are meant for everyone, whether you're a lay practitioner or an ordained practitioner. These are the teachings that will help us to accomplish many wonderful things on the path. So again, we had these 6 recollections. This was the first part of this sort of outline of Nagarjuna's. After the 3 jewels that I just went through in our meditation, we had the recollection of generosity. So we had the Sangha, and let me see if I can, that's the one problem with having this at the bottom of the screen down here in the Kompa, is that okay. Then we had on page 10, oops, this is page 10 of the commentary that I put together. It's not page 10 yet. This is, again, I'm sort of replicating the commentary that's in the book by translated by Artemis Engel and Geshe Tarchin. So we have generosity, and it's important to recall generosity, as I said the last time, because this is the means for at least us accomplishing having good resources in this life. We can also, of course, use our generosity all the way to the point of it being one of the perfections. We're going to see those coming up a little later. But the idea is that we need to practice generosity. We need to be very liberal on giving in our with our resources, because otherwise we won't create the causes to have those resources in the future. Of course, we also need the factor of morality. Morality is the main cause for attaining good rebirths and for having good things in our lives in general. It is because when we engage in morality, we're creating a positive karma, and that can ripen into good rebirths. Again, I was relating those 2 in particular to the causes we need to create, at least to get a good human rebirth at the end of this life. We have this wonderful human rebirth now. It's important that we at least have it again so that we can continue on our spiritual path. Of course, if we can make greater strides in terms of more lasting results, more ultimate results like liberation and enlightenment, that's great. But nonetheless, we at least need to rely upon these as the very foundation of our path. The last one we didn't get to, which is recollecting the deities. It's kind of an interesting one. It doesn't seem to fit as neatly in with the other 5. But let's read what Nagarjuna, well, this is again Venerable Randawa's commentary on Nagarjuna's text. He says, the virtues of the deities are expressed as follows. There are deities ranging from the class of the 4 divine monarchs, and then there's the Sanskrit for that, the Katarmana Raja Kayika, and the 33 Trimsa. I'm not very good with the Sanskrit, obviously. To those deities called those who control the emanations of others, Paranirmita Vasa Vartim. The remembrance of deities consists of being mindful of the qualities which have caused them to be born into these celestial states, and of emulating them in one's moral and meditative practices. So the very end of it gets to kind of why do we recollect deities? And because deities have achieved even greater positive karma than we have as human beings. Nonetheless, it's not always the ideal place to be. Let me share this little chart. This is the bottom of a chart that has to do with all the various realms of existence. In what's called the desire realm, which is where we are, there are 6 realms. Those first 3 at the top are actually the beginning of what's called the form realm. In the desire realm, there are God realms, demigod realms, human realms, animal realm, hungry spirit or preta realm, and then the hell realms. Within the God realms, there are 6. Remember, it said from the 4 monarchs, that's the 4 royal lineages, up through the heaven of the 33, up all the way to the 6th level, which is called controlling others' emanations. These 6 states of existence are all within, again, what we call the God realms. It's the highest state within the desire realm. So what do we mean, again, by these gods? This is a very powerful positive karma. And it said that even in the time of the Buddha, he went to the realm of the 33, that second God realm, to teach the beings there. So they do have access to the Dharma on some occasions. But one of the problems, of course, of being born in the God realms is that most of them become totally intoxicated with the pleasures of that realm. There's very little coarse suffering in those realms. Tend to have mostly idyllic sorts of experiences. Amrita, this nectar, all this wonderful stuff that you can enjoy. And so they don't necessarily see the unfavorable aspects of samsara. That's why the human realm is actually said to be one of the ideal states, because we have a balance of kind of suffering and happiness, most of us. There are human beings born into this world with a preponderance of suffering that keeps them in a state of that continually. But most of us have suffering on occasion, like when we do get ill and have problems and difficulties, but we also have a measure of happiness, of well-being, things that kind of show us that there's two sides to this. And we can then see that there's some kind of something to work with, to work towards, to achieving more lasting states of well-being and happiness. So when we're recollecting the deities, as was said in that little bit of commentary, we're mostly recollecting the causes that lead one to have high rebirths. Not that we necessarily want to create the causes for a deity rebirth, because again, it can be problematic. You can be reborn into those realms of great bliss and well-being, and then the karma eventually expires, and you have these horrific things that happen actually at the end of the lives in those God realms. Some of you have read in the Lam Rim on this, where essentially they say that in the last week or so of their life there, everything starts to wilt. They have these beautiful flower gardens that seem to be permanently smelling beautiful and looking wonderful. They all start to wilt and start smelling bad. The bodies of the gods start to smell bad. You have all these signs of like death is approaching, and all the other gods shun you. They said this is actually one of the worst forms of suffering in all of samsara because of the mental anguish that you feel. Now, they often even call these heavens. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, if we talk about, and this is just my own thought, this isn't in any of these texts, but I grew up Catholic, right? And I was given this idea of trying to get to heaven with God. And I think that perhaps there's something to be said for that realm of heaven, that beings who practice Christianity with great faith or what have you may be reborn in a heaven like these, where you end up going there and thinking, oh wow, this is it. I'm in eternity in heaven. I finally have reached there. The problem is, of course, is that if it is a conditioned realm of samsara, which is what Buddhism would hold, well, then eventually it will cease. You will no longer be able to continue to abide there. Karma will ripen and you will take rebirth in another realm. Now, the only way to get to any sort of lasting state of peace is by attaining nirvana or enlightenment. Again, so I'm just saying that, and I'm not trying to, again, put any other faith tradition down. I'm just kind of giving it that label of how Buddhists might perceive that. Maybe even Jesus Christ has his own sort of pure land or some sort of realm, a heaven realm, where people can go and be with Jesus Christ and receive teachings that help to advance their mind. That's also another possibility. But the idea is that these sorts of realms that we're talking about here, these God realms, are not necessarily ideal, but we should emulate the energy it takes to get to those realms, to practice good morality. They put back on the screen the text here and go back to that. So it's to practice emulating them in one's moral and meditative practices. Now, there are meditative states that go beyond that. We also call them the gods often. That's the form and formless realm. They're often referred to as gods, but they are not in the desire realm like us. They are states that actually do arise on the basis of meditative concentration. And you develop a form realm rebirth through practicing what are called the four concentrations. Here they're labeled as absorptions, the first through the fourth absorption or concentration. Let me pull this over so I can kind of get that up there on the screen. And then we have the four formless absorptions. Of course, you have pure lands that I had mentioned just a short while ago as part of the form realm as well. When you get to the formless realm, these four that are at the top here, you have a very deep meditative state, that causes you to take rebirth there, but there's no real physical form that you have there, other than a very, very subtle wind energy that goes with you. So going back to these 6 recollections, again, we're mainly focusing on the causes, the moral and meditative practices that we want to emulate for those who are reborn as deities. It's pretty much all I can say. These 6 recollections aren't really taught that extensively in a lot of other texts. Are there any questions on that or on any of the other recollections? Let me take that off before we move on, because we are going into a whole new verse and topic with this next part. Anything? Okay, so and that's one of the first main practices for both lay and ordained practitioners. What we're going to get into now, and I know many of you have had teachings on the 10 non-virtuous actions as well as the 10 virtuous actions that oppose those. But nonetheless, I am going to spend a little bit of time on it for the sake of those who may not have seen more developed teachings, detailed teachings on that. But also, I do want to review it for everyone. I mean, there is something about hearing this again and something for me to teach it again that is always useful to help refresh our minds on what is all entailed in these. By the way, there is a little kind of this is a booklet that is produced by the FPMT that goes into the 10 non-virtues and their results in a lot of detail. And I'm actually going to cite some things on that in a moment. But let's go back to Nagarjuna's verse and the Venerable Rendawa's commentary on this. So the second topic of these three first topics is the 10 paths. The first one was, again, the 6 recollections. It says, because the 6 remembrances or recollections make the mind pure and are a source of great merit, recollecting the 3 jewels and so on, they are presented first. The following verse indicates that one who possesses an attitude of sincere faith towards these 6 objects of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and so on, should next exert themselves in the performance of virtue. So why do we recollect those beings and the generosity, morality, and so on? To inspire us to practice virtue. So what is being set out in this next 2 lines, this first part of verse 5, practice constantly the 10 paths of virtuous karma in body, speech, and mind, are again the opposites of the 10 non-virtues. Normally we approach this in the teachings on karma, and where we look at these 10 actions that are set out by the Buddha that do encompass kind of the main ways that we go astray. The main ways that through our physical actions, through our body, what we call the first door, the door of the body, our verbal actions, which is through the door of our speech, and then, of course, the mental actions, which are at the root of all of this, those that we generate through our mind, the third door. So body, speech, and mind are the 3 ways in which we create karma: physical, verbal, and mental actions. But karma is always created, excuse me, with some mental action, because our bodies and our speech don't just start, doing things without our minds being involved, right? It's our mind that gives motivation and impetus for us to open our mouth and speak, or to do something physically with our bodies. So these are the 10 opposites in the sense of they're not just simply avoiding those actions, because all of you right now who are listening to this, I would hope, are engaging in the act of not killing, right? Hopefully you're not taking the life of another being. You're not, throwing a lobster in a pot of boiling water or smashing a flea that's on your cat or something like that. Hopefully you're not doing those sorts of things while you're listening to this. But are you engaged in the virtue of not killing? Just on the surface, no, because you're not being challenged with the idea of killing. So we have to, again, look at these as being something more than simply not doing the action. It means to refrain from the action at a time when we would be compelled to or tempted to engage in that action. That's when the virtue becomes particularly strong. Now, again, there are vows that we can take, such as the vow to not kill, which is part of the pratimoksha vows. And then you would actually generate merit all the time, regardless of whether there's a being there that would be tempting you to engage in killing. That's the only way that you can kind of get that round-the-clock virtuous behavior. But we do want to, as much as possible, be very mindful that whenever there is an occasion to engage in any of these 10, that we do the opposite. That we say, I'm not going to take the life of this being, for example. I'm going to protect that being. I'm going to make sure that it continues to have its little life, that it can go on for as long as possible with the life that it cherishes as much as we cherish our own dear lives, okay? So that's the idea behind this, and let's go back to the text and we'll look at it. Again, it's presented from this point of view, but of course, it goes into a whole explanation of the 10 non-virtues because that is important to understand what these are the opposite of, the refraining from. So the virtuous paths of karma, Venerable Randawa says, are called virtuous because they yield many desirable results. Remember, virtue gives rise to happiness. Non-virtue gives rise to suffering. And they're called karma because their essence consists of action, right? Because karma is action. Karma, we often equate it in our culture with the result. We say, oh, that's their karma. Well, what is the result of karma that they created that's actually going on? Karma is technically the cause, the action that we engage in that then will ripen into a future experience. And then they're called paths in that they lead to the favorable states of existence, particularly when they have 4 factors in place, or 5, depending on how you're counting them. We're going to go into that in a little more detail shortly. So they are virtuous because they produce desirable results. They're karma because they're action. They are paths in that they're a pathway that directs you to a favorable state of existence in this case. If we called them non-virtuous karmic paths, then they would be those that lead to unfavorable states of existence. Then he goes on to say they are further of 10 forms, ranging from the avoidance of taking lives to the right view, which is the opposite of the last of the 10, wrong view. 3 of them, the avoidance of taking lives, avoiding stealing, and avoiding any inappropriate sexual behavior, pertain to the body. Those are the first 3. 4 of them, the avoidance of stating falsehoods, or in other words, lying, the avoidance of talk that is divisive, that divides others, creates division. The third one would be the harsh speech, speech that is hateful towards others. And then the final is meaningless speech, So avoiding those 4 types of speech are, again, one of the subsets of these 10. And they all pertain to how we use our verbal abilities. The last 3, the absence of covetousness, harmful intent or malice, and then wrong view, those are all within the mind. We're going to see those as we go through them in more detail. So these lines of verse thus state that one should constantly practice the 10 in body, speech, and mind, respectively. That as much as possible, we should try to engage in the virtues of body, speech, and mind through avoiding these 10, the 10 non-virtues. All right, so the 10 paths of virtuous karma are practiced by means of eschewing the 10 paths of non-virtuous karma, again, taking lives and so on. We'll see them in a moment. One may then ask how these non-virtuous acts are defined. In general, they are defined as the undertaking and consummation of the particular act of taking a life and so on upon an appropriate object and with an afflicted state of mind. So this is just starting to touch base with what we are referring to as kind of the main branches of an action. Those things, I'm going to need to actually pull up another slide that I forgot. Let me see if I can get to that pretty easily. Sorry about this. I realized just now that I forgot to pull up one that I needed. Letter to a friend. Let me get the, because I do have within this some slides that will help us to take a look at these various features. So let me do a slideshow from current slide, and then I can share them on screen. Whoops, I wasn't supposed to do that. Actually, that's because I wasn't really supposed to share them yet, because I'm not screen sharing, only here in the Go, but can you see that? Okay, how do I get out of this? There we go. All right, so let me go back to Zoom and do a screen share. Again, I prepared a little slide that goes into these various components of an action. And I want to go through this first because it is important that we do have kind of some language around what are these various factors in an action that are important for us to be mindful of, to be aware of when things tend to go into sort of the wrong dimension. Sorry, I've got to get past all the ones I did the last time. Again, we're in these actual instructions. This is where we're at. We looked at the 6 remembrances. Now we are looking at the 10 paths. This is verses 5 through 7. So what's on the screen there for you is essentially what Venerable Randawa says And he divides these actually into 5, saying there are 5 components of what's called a complete path of action. Pabalka Rinpoche, which many of you are familiar with, his book called Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, kind of repeats those 5, but he combines 2 of the 5 that Venerable Randawa has into the second of these 4. And so it ends up being 4. So again, what I've done is I've kind of mirrored them to some degree so that what is in Randawa you can kind of make sense of. So I want to talk about these in terms of the act of killing, because I think it is important that we at least use an example, all right? If you were engaging in the act of killing, the object or the basis would always be another living being, right? Because you need a being as a basis in order to engage in the act of killing. If the being isn't there, then no act of killing can take place. In terms of the next bits where it says 2A and 2B on the left and 2ABC on the right, these are all what tend to be called kind of the mental state. You know, what is going on with our minds in terms of the mental component of the action. So on the left, you'll see what Geshe or Venerable Randawa details. He says first there has to be some intent that consists of a conception, meaning to conceive the object correctly, to kind of know that that is a being that we're intending to kill. And then the motivation, the actual intention to kill that being. So he kind of combines those 2, which we're going to see divided out on the right-hand side. The second part of it for Venerable Randawa is because these are all non-virtues that we're looking at, killing and so on. There's always an afflicted state of mind or a mental affliction. This is where we were just, at in terms of Venerable Randawa's commentary. It ended with they have an appropriate object and with an afflicted state of mind. Obviously, many other components, but those are the kind of main 2 components is that you have an object that you are acting on, such as an ant, for example, that you are intending to kill. You have a correct conception of that being an ant and not something else, some other being or a piece of dirt or whatever. And then you have the intention to actually take the life of that ant. Then you have an afflicted state of mind, such as anger. Perhaps some people don't like ants being around their house and they get very angry at them and kill out of anger. The third component that Venerable Randawa has is the preparation. He calls it preparation in our text. It means you have to actually prepare to engage in it. For example, you have to get maybe some ant spray that you're getting, to point towards the ants and begin the process of spraying. The finalization is when the ant or ants die. So if you're spraying this one single ant, it's unfortunately it curls over on its back and eventually passes away. Then the act is complete. On the right-hand side, you see the exact same factors are just structured a little bit differently. What we call the object is the basis, again, an ant in this case. What we're calling intention encompasses all 3 of the factors that are on the left-hand side there. Recognition, meaning we do conceive of the object correctly. A motive, which is motivation to actually take the life of that being. A delusion. Delusion and affliction are essentially equivalent terms. You have to have some sort of deluded state of mind. That's what makes it non-virtue, primarily. And then you do the deed, which in the case of Venerable Randawa, he calls it the preparation. And then you have, whoops, I don't know what happened there. It's supposed to say final step. Somehow when I was editing these, final step. No one knows what a final is. I don't even know what a final is. So it should say final step. Sorry. And sometimes when I'm going in and editing things, I'm on the wrong page and then I don't realize I've inserted something. So whether you call it 4 things or you divide the second one into 2 and have like kind of a different iteration, we're basically talking about what are the things, the factors, the components that make our actions really strong, really powerful. It is said that if you don't have all of these components, again, the 4, 5, 6, whatever, however they're detailed, if you don't have them all in place, you cannot create the full karma to be reborn in an unfortunate realm. You still will create karma, but that karma won't be complete. Karma is created with almost everything we do. Even neutral karma is created. We mostly talk about virtuous and non-virtuous, but we also create neutral karma. But essentially, karma is a mechanism by which we have certain results, experiences in our life now, as well as future lives. It is the means by which we accomplish anything that we intend to accomplish or avoid the things we don't want to experience. Having a perfect knowledge of karma will help one to avoid, in this case, we're primarily looking at how to avoid being born in an unfortunate state. How do we make sure that our morality is at a level that will assure that at the end of this life, we can go on to a favorable existence, that we don't get propelled down into an unfortunate realm and then have to be blocked from attaining anything really meaningful or purposeful with that life. And moreover, experience unbelievable suffering in those existences. And we will see these realms being explored a little bit more in terms of Venerable Rendawa's text and the commentary on Nagarjuna, in terms of the various realms of existence. Not quite there yet, but nonetheless, you will see them come back. So let's go forward to talk about this afflicted state of mind. So this afflicted state of mind is one of the mental components. It's one in which an individual is overcome primarily by any of the three poisons: desire or attachment, hatred, anger, that kind of energy, or ignorance. Even given the afflicted state of mind, let's pause it for a moment and talk about those. This doesn't mean that we have to have one of those three present in kind of a main form. We can also have some of the other delusions that arise from them. For example, you could have jealousy present as a motivating affliction for engaging in an act that is harmful to someone else, right? You could have pride. You could have a lot of different delusions, but they can if we talk about the essence of all of our delusions, they come down to three main categories, the three poisons. They say that at the root of all of them is a deeper form of ignorance, but we can have many different types of ignorance. And a lot of people, for example, have an ignorance that thinks that the lives of ants are insignificant, right? That those beings do not matter. They have no status in terms of the status that humans have, and so one would neglect the welfare of those beings and even take their lives out of that ignorance and thinking, oh, no big deal. It's good to get rid of insects, just too many ants. A lot of ants in New Mexico in the summer, right? So we might have that mentality that's just kind of a coarser form of ignorance. But of course, we also have the two poles of anger and attachment. Attachment to having things be the way we want them to be, which is, I want my nice clean counter. I don't want ants crawling around. I don't want them in my house. I don't want them near my pet's food. I don't want them anywhere. We have that kind of mentality that's really attached to having our house be free of those things because that's how we like our lives to be. It's very much an attachment motivation. Or as I was saying earlier, you could have anger. Maybe you got absolute hatred of ants because they got into some really expensive food that you brought home and you didn't close it up so well. And so you had to throw the whole thing away because it was ant infested. So now you're like, they're your arch enemy. You're going to do everything you can because you despise them, to kill them and to get them out of your kitchen. So we have different kind of flavors of that in terms of other delusions. They do all boil down to either we've got some level of ignorance, some attachment, or some anger. Those sorts of energies that propel us into engaging in killing, engaging in stealing, all the other non-virtues. Now, what Rendawa is going to go into here is going to talk about when some of these branches aren't complete. So he says, you can have this afflicted state of mind. He says, even given the afflicted state of mind, however, an act not undertaken with an intent that accurately recognizes the character of the object constitutes no complete karmic path. In other words, if you were to, while being angry, even though you've got the afflicted state of mind, you might even kill an ant, but the ant was not what you were intending to kill. You didn't have a mind that was directed towards the ant. Maybe you were just angry and throwing something across the counter and it happened to hit an ant and kill the ant. Well, you didn't have an intention to kill that ant, right? Even though you had an afflicted state of mind and anger in it. So it says there, notwithstanding even its consummation, even if that ant were to die, Why? Because the two limbs of intent and preparation haven't occurred. You didn't prepare to kill that ant out of an intention, a motive to kill it. So you didn't see the ant. You were angry and you threw something across your counter, but it happened to kill the ant more or less by accident. You don't have a complete karmic path then. He's giving just a lot of different little iterations of when you don't quite have everything in place to make this into a very powerful karma. The second example, if both an afflicted mind and the intent occur, but through an erring mind it is carried out upon some other object, the act does not constitute a complete karmic path, even should it become consummated, because the intent and preparation are mistaken. The way I understand this in terms of killing is that if you intended to kill an ant, but say there was a fly that happened to appear there as the minute that you were getting ready to smash the ant, even though you kill the fly, you don't have a complete karmic action in regard to killing the ant, because that ant was not killed by virtue of your action. Instead, there was an erroneous kind of a distinguishing of the object. You don't have the object of the ant having been killed. All right. So you kill an ant while intending to kill a fly, or kill a fly while intending to kill an ant. You have some error that's not going to be consuming or the entire action. It doesn't make the whole thing powerful. It's a powerful karma to take the life of any being. But if you intended to kill being A and you somehow killed being B, it's not complete with regard to the killing of being A. Another iteration, if both the afflicted mind and the intent are present, but the act is neither undertaken nor consummated, it does not constitute a complete karmic path, because it has only been conceived of in the mind, while the limbs of preparation and of the main stage, the actual perpetration of the act, have not occurred. So this is, again, another possibility. You might think really strongly about doing something, and then for whatever reason, you're getting ready to kill this ant. You haven't started the full preparation, but the phone rings, and you go get the phone and you go, oh, hello, and start talking to somebody. And then when you finish, you go, what was I doing? Oh, I was going to kill that ant, but the ant's long gone now. You don't have the ant there any longer. Of course, that's not a complete karmic path, though there's some karma created, because you generated an intent to kill a being, but it was never prepared nor consummated. You never started to engage in the action or took the life of that being. All right, let's carry on. There's, again, a few more of these that kind of get into different factors, all these various factors. If an afflicted mind and the intent are present, and an attempt is made to carry out the act, but it does not reach finalization, the act does not constitute a complete karmic path, because the main stage limb has not occurred. This is, for example, you get ready to kill the ant by, say, smashing it with, I don't know, whatever you have, some sort of a fly swatter sort of thing, or something that you decide you're going to take the life of that ant. But for whatever reason, the ant escapes. The ant gets away. You did the act of trying to kill it, but you didn't bring it to consummation because the ant managed to escape. All right. So that has not occurred because, again, maybe the ant's crawled into a crevice, a crack in your kitchen counter, and now it's long gone. So you did create some powerful karma by trying to kill that being, but you didn't actually consummate it. Okay, when both an afflicted mind and intent are present, and the attempt and finalization of a given act are perpetrated with regard or respect to a given object, then a complete path of non-virtuous karma exists. To be more specific, the definitions of the 10 paths of karma are understood as having 5 parts. Again, he defines it as 5. The object, the basis, we would call it, again, in Pabonka Rinpoche's presentation, meaning for killing, there always has to be a being that we are intending to kill, or that is the object of that killing. The intent, which for Venerable Rendawa, he divided that into 2. The conception, seeing that this is the being that we are intending to kill, and then the motive, I actually want to kill it. That's the being, that ant on the counter, and I have an intention to kill it. That's the intent for Venerable Rendawa. The preparation is the actual movement in the direction, doing the deed of beginning to strike at that ant. And then the mental affliction, which again can be any of those deluded states of mind, primarily in the 3 poisons. Again, for Bhavanka Rinpoche, he includes mental affliction with the 2 factors of intent. So that gets all combined into a sort of mental state. And then again, the finalization. You actually have to have the culmination of the act so that you can have the kind of completion of that karma. So he says, of these, the object is that entity upon which a given act, such as the taking of life, is carried out. The thing, either animate or inanimate, through which any of the 10 non-virtuous paths of karma comes about. All right, so that's just again getting at the object, the main one. Intent, as I just explained briefly, is twofold: conception and motivation. Conception further is itself of 4 types. We can conceive of the object correctly as being what it is. We see the ant as being an ant. We can conceive of what is not the object as being such. We see a piece of dirt and we think it's an ant, right? Conceiving of what is the object as not being such, we see the ant, but we didn't think it was an ant. We thought it was a piece of dirt. And 4, conceiving of what is not the object as not being such. So somehow, I mean, if you're having a conception of a piece of dirt that's not the ant as being a piece of dirt that's not the ant, seems kind of strange to say that, but I guess that is one possible conception. But only the first of these can actually comprise the limb of a karmic path when you conceive of it correctly. The ant as being the ant in the example of killing the ant. For no act, Venerable Rendawa says, will be complete through any of the other 3. All right, let's see if there's any questions when we get through these, and then we'll go into the individual acts. Motivation is the desire to carry out a particular act upon a given object. So that means, the motivation to kill. We often use motivation and intention in a very similar way, but they actually do have very different meanings in Buddhism. Motivation is what is the guiding idea of why you are doing something. I'm going to engage in this action to take the life of that being, to get that ant out of my life by taking its life so it's no longer in my kitchen. The preparation is every effort of the 3 gateways, whether that's the body, speech, and mind, whether one's own or another's, initiated for the purpose of accomplishing the particular deed. Means I'm going to grab the fly swatter or whatever that I'm going to kill the ant with. I'm going to raise it up above my head and begin to strike it. That's the preparation that gets you to the point of the kind of culmination eventually, which is the next paragraph. And then mental affliction is thrown in here. Mental affliction, again, is any one of the 3 poisons of desire or attachment, hatred or anger, and then again, ignorance. But as I said, you can also have other motivating factors of jealousy and so on. Then finalization, or what we often simply call completion, is completing that desired act through the efforts associated with it, and may occur either at the same moment that those efforts are made or at some subsequent time. For example, with killing, maybe you go to kill the ant and you swat it with the fly swatter or something, and it manages to crawl away somewhat wounded and goes into the wall, and maybe doesn't die for another day or so. Well, when that being dies, we have the culmination of that act, regardless of whether we're present and see the ant die in front of us. So it can happen at the same moment, the moment that we strike it with the fly swatter and its little body stops twitching and it's dead, or it happens, unbeknownst to us at a later point. Thus, and again, may be known to us even as well, too. We may see the dead ant later on our counter and go, oh, that's the ant I struck with that. Thus, it should be understood that the non-virtuous karmic paths are defined in terms of these 5 aspects. So let me go back to that and just go through this one more time with that. I wanted to maybe see, because this one looks kind of strange to put it up there. I hope they're seeing it at home. Are you seeing it on the screen here?
No, we're not.
You're
But
not?
we are seeing it at home.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that gets to be one of these problems with my mirroring my screen. Let me see if I can do it this way. Yes, Mary Jo?
So it seems like you could interrupt that except at the finalization.
Yeah, I mean, Mary Jo's question is, it seems like you can, kind of interrupt everything moving in a particular direction until you get to the completion. Or, what's called here the final step. Let me correct that while I'm here. So let me try putting this on screen and see what happens for everyone here, as well as at home. It's not going to that, maybe because I have the other open.
Mhm.
This is good enough, and hopefully you can see it at home. This is within the PowerPoint file. It does seem that, again, you can see it?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so again, what we have is many factors that culminate with the finalization. As Mary Jo is saying, there are many things that we can do to interrupt things, as we go through this, various steps. But obviously, we want to try to abandon even the intent, because that's already some karma. Karma is created the moment that we start thinking, I want to kill this being. It's not as strong as if we actually do the preparation and actually do the finalization. The being's life is actually taken. But we, want to avoid negative karma. Of course, that means also avoiding the afflicted states of mind. That's a much deeper work. We'll talk about that as we get into other verses in this text. So again, we have the object or the basis, which is, in the case of killing another being, we have the intent on the left and the afflicted state of mind. These are divided into three components in a sense that get replicated on the right-hand side. Recognizing or conceiving that being correctly or that object correctly, having a motivation, a motive to kill, in this case, the act of killing, an afflicted state of mind, such as killing out of anger or delusion, as we often call the afflictions. There's a preparation or deed when we actually move in the direction of committing that act, and a finalization when it is brought to culmination. Again, this is how we get very strong karma. But as I was pointing out, don't think that that's the only karma we need to be worried about, because we're engaging in karma every time that a thought occurs. Wholesome, unwholesome, what have you. That's why, again, we want to really get down to working with our minds eventually. But the real bottom line is to begin with our physical and verbal actions, at least, and then start to be more attentive to what's going on in our minds. So let me go ahead and share. Are there any questions on these 4 or 5, is depending on how you're looking at them, these factors? Anything?
So I'm wondering about people who eat meat.
Mm-hmm.
Are they, I mean, there must be some kind of karma that they're creating, but not the killing part?
So Stella's question is, in the case of someone who eats meat, what karma are they creating? And she's assuming, yes, that it's not the act of killing, but is it another karma? And there's a lot of debate on meat in particular. Venerable Rabina, when she teaches on this, she says it's very clear you're not engaging in the act of killing, as you pointed out. I mean, if we look at the various branches, that's not happening, right? It's a dead animal that's in front of you, the flesh of a dead animal, right? It doesn't have any, it's not the object, the actual animal. It is, you're not having an intention to kill, you're having an intention to eat. You're trying to satisfy your desire for food. One teacher that I had said that it's probably closer to the act of stealing than it is to killing, which was kind of interesting, because what this teacher's perception was that from the entire thing of somebody raising an animal that is going to be killed, and of course sold, the meat of that animal is sold then to someone to begin the process of packaging it and what have you till it becomes, the food on your plate, that all of that was done without the permission of the animal. That animal had that body, that was their body. Just like we consider this to be our body, right? Somebody came up and wanted to eat our body, we'd like, thank you very much, but you need permission to do that. You can't just start, chopping off my arm and decide that you're going to make that into dinner. So this teacher's perspective was that from the very moment that that animal's life is taken for its flesh, there is an act of killing that occurs then, but there is an act of stealing that continues on all the way to the person who is consuming it. Even if they paid money for it to somebody who's the middle people that are from when it's killed all the way to it being on your plate. Makes some sense, but you don't also have the intention to steal. That's what's missing from it in my estimation. Because you would need to have the intention to possess something that does not belong to you and to make it your own, as we'll see when we get to stealing. Now, you are working, you're dealing in bartered goods to some degree. Does the person who buys something from somebody that they stole from someone else, do they accumulate the karma of stealing? I don't think so. So that's another argument that I think we can put aside. So it's not killing, it's not stealing. I don't think, in my estimation, and many teachers would agree with at least the first one. But it is an act that has some karma to it because of the eating out of desire and satisfying one's desires in that way. And obviously, if we look at the world we live in, there is a karma that's created by the mass number of people who are seeking to eat meat of animals and everything that happens in terms of that, the killing of those animals, as well as what's happening even to our planet on the basis of so many animal lives. So there's a lot of peripheral karma, but I don't think it fits neatly into any of these 10 non-virtuous actions. It is a karma. And again, one can change that action. If you're a Buddhist and have a strong, even though you eat meat, His Holiness the Dalai Lama eats meat, right? If you have a strong desire to benefit that being, you can make that act of eating their flesh into something very virtuous. You can recite mantras on that meat. You can have the thought of, I want to really connect karmically with this being whose flesh I am eating to make sure that I do everything I can to help them in future lives. You can, use that nourishment that you're gaining from that food to strengthen your motivation of benefiting others. You can do so much with it that's virtuous. You can transform that act. So I don't think it falls into any of these as being kind of a naturally non-virtuous action. Nonetheless, the Buddha did encourage people to avoid taking the lives of beings wherever possible. But Lama Zopa Rinpoche has said it's impossible to live in this world and not be complicit in harm and even death to other beings, right? Every summer when I decide to drive up here from, Santa Fe, if I do come up for any sort of teachings or anything, then I'd be on the road, right? Killing bugs that are smashed under my tires as well as on the windshield and everything. It's impossible to do things in this world without being complicit in harming others. So I don't know, that's a long answer to your question, but
Because I was thinking about like Native Americans before they kill an animal for food or whatever, or how they used to do it. Ask the permission and,
Mhm. They
maybe
try to
recite
do something.
mantras or prayers or whatever.
Yeah.
And, so, yeah.
So yes, Stella was saying if you didn't hear it, that in the Native American tradition, at least some people would have the practice of asking the animal for permission to take the flesh of that animal before consuming it, which makes a lot more sense than people that are just consuming things that have never done that. Whether the animal can still give permission at that point is hard to say, but nonetheless. So I think, again, what this is getting at is when we refine this down to these 10 non-virtuous actions, we're talking about very specific things that are all naturally non-virtuous. They have a component to them that makes them non-virtuous. We still can slightly change the karma of those through having a different mindset, but it's much harder to do. But in regard to all these other things that we do that are peripheral to it, eating the flesh of those animals that are killed and so on, we become more distant from the act of killing. We're not really doing the act of killing. Now, if you go to someone's house and they say, oh, let's kill an animal, let's got a chicken here that's ready to eat, let's chop its head off and start the whole process and whatever, and you happily do that for your meal, well, then you're much closer to it, right? They say that you have to be very careful about those sorts of things. Mary, please, you have a question.
Don, thank you so much for the teaching. So can you clarify the difference between motivation and intention?
So again, intention, as it's presented in this teaching on karma, intention gets to be kind of encompassing a lot of these factors that are mental. It's kind of the whole state of mind that feeds into the mental factor of intention. The mental factor of intention is usually just simply described as the movement of the mind in a particular direction. So the movement of the mind towards the act of killing entails these three components, making sure that we are, recognizing the object correctly, that we have that cognizance, that we have a intention, or motive is a better word. Motive is the word that was used in our text here. A motive or motivation to take the life of that being, for example, and that we also have an affliction that is flavoring the mind at that time. Because you could kill, I mean, it's a little far-fetched and very hard for us to get our heads around completely. You could take the life of a being out of compassion, but it would have to be very, very strong compassion in order for it to transform the full action, because killing is naturally non-virtuous. But if we have an affliction present and a motive to do that action, such as killing, and the correct recognition, those all together form the intention. Again, the way that it was presented on that slide with Venerable Randhawa is that he kind of put intent and put two of them there and divorced the afflicted state of mind from those. It's very hard to get at the exact English of a lot of these concepts too, because we often, again, do equate intention and motivation. But intention, again, is kind of that force that pushes you or compels you to do an action. I often say it's sort of like the magnetic force that causes metal filings to come towards the magnet. It's kind of the same thing in regard to various, we're causing things, our mind to move in the direction of various things. So when we see that ant and that ant's crawling on our counter, we suddenly have, like, maybe even the affliction arises first, right? Like, I hate ants. The stupid ants, they got into my really, delicious food the other day that was so pricey, and now I had to go out and buy a whole new quantity of that or whatever. And so we like have some affliction present that's like ours grasping at our own well-being and neglecting the welfare of that ant. And then we correctly are identifying it. We say, yeah, that's an ant, all right. It's crawling around on the counter. It's not something else. And we say, I'm going to get a fly swatter and kill that ant. And then we go through the preparation and so on. So the intention is kind of all of those put together, the way it's presented in this complete path of action, or complete karmic path. And when we talk about intention and motivation in general, there still is that kind of relationship. Intention being, if you will, something much bigger, because it's just simply the movement of the mind, whereas motivation is a quite specific flavoring of that movement of the mind. The movement of the mind towards wanting to kill or wanting to become a Buddha. When we generate our motivation of bodhicitta, right? That's a motivation that is flavoring our mind. It's part of our intention, but it's not the fullness of our intention in a sense. It's also just a component. So again, we can see there's a relationship between the two of them, motivation being a part of our overall intention, but intention having more components to it. Okay. Again, it's all has to do with the word choice for various translation equivalents of terms in Tibetan and Sanskrit and what have you. So it gets to be hard to find the exact same thing in English. But so are we clear? Any other questions on these 4 or 5 components, depending upon, again, which presentation? So we can see instances where, as was kind of being pointed out by Venerable Randhawa, where we start to have things move in a particular direction, but they don't get culminated. Of course, there are also a whole lot of teachings within the teachings on karma that I'm not going to get into about when we've created karma that's not so definite to be experienced, such as karma in a dream. You do have some mental presence in your dream, right? But in the dream state, there's no real object, right? You might dream about, I hope you don't dream about killing beings, but nonetheless, you could dream about certain non-virtuous actions in your dream state. But the objects aren't there, right? They're dream objects. So the karma isn't as strong because it's primarily mental. It's what you are creating mentally with no real basis. If there's no basis, you can't complete that act, whatever it is that you're doing in the dream. All right? So I'm not going to go again into the whole depths of karma, but because it's presented, at least in terms of these actions, I wanted to make sure to go through this with you. Now, what I like to do as well is go back to that little thing that's in the book that by the FPMT, the 10 non-virtues and their results. Let's page down on this to where the book starts. There's a bunch of little stuff. Oh, no, not there's. This is correct. It starts right at the beginning with this. Okay.
Mostly the 10 paths,
Oh, are you?
you know,
Okay.
and Dawa.
Oh boy, how do I get rid of that? Hmm. Here in the Gompa, they're seeing something different than what I'm. I had this problem once when I was doing a presentation. We may have to change what we're doing, like go back to what we did 2 weeks ago. We're trying something new here, and I don't know that. What I can do here is let me get out of these. Oops. And out of, I don't want to quite close out all of that yet. Okay, that's it. Let's try from Zoom now and see if I can get this to come up. Is it on the screen now? 10 non-virtues and their results? Okay, good. Yeah, I'm not sure how we're gonna make sure we're doing all this, but so let's go into what the FPMT presents, which is based on Pabanka Rinpoche. Each of the 10 non-virtuous actions has 4 components, again, 5 in Venerable Rendawa, or factors. For the action to be complete, that is, to bring the full karmic result, all 4 components must be present. These 4 are the basis or object of the action, the intention, as in Mary's question, intention has 3 components. The state of mind of the person performing the action includes 3 parts: recognition, motive or motivation, and delusion or affliction. And then the deed, actually performing the action, which again was called preparation in Venerable Rendawa's text. And then the finalization, the completion of the action. If any of the 4 factors is missing, the action will not be complete, but will still bring suffering in the future. Because we're creating karma. Thinking about killing an ant versus actually killing it are very different, but thinking about it is enough to create some negative karma. The 10 non-virtues are divided into 3 non-virtues of body, 4 of speech, and 3 of mind, as was set out in Rendawa's commentary. So let me go through killing, and then I'm not going to go through all of them because otherwise we'll be here, on this topic for several weeks. The first one is the basis, which again is always a living being other than yourself. It's actually interesting. In this definition, killing yourself is not a complete karmic action. It's still negative karma, don't get me wrong. Suicide is not something that Buddhists condone, but it is not complete because you die at the moment that the object of your action dies. Actually, they say that in order to accumulate the karma of killing, the being who is the object of your killing has to die before you die. Because it is happening simultaneously, you can't collect the karma of a complete act of killing when you commit suicide. The intention, again, has 3 components. Recognition, you recognize unmistakably the person or being you intend to kill. The motive is you intend to kill that being. You have a delusion, motivated to kill out of anger, attachment, or ignorance. An enemy or being that annoys you, then you would be killing out of anger, out of attachment, killing an animal for its meat or skin, out of ignorance, killing animals, as I said earlier, with the belief that they were placed on this earth to be used by humans for food, or killing animals as a sacrifice to a worldly god, believing this to be virtuous. That would be a form of ignorance. The deed is you carry out the killing by some means, a weapon, poison, black magic, either directly by yourself, or in this case, in some of these actions, you can ask someone to kill for you. And, kill that deer. I don't have my gun's not loaded right now. Shoot that deer for me. I really want the meat of that deer, that venison or whatever. The completion is the other person or being dies before you do. As it says there, suicide is a negative action that will bring suffering in the future, but is not a complete act because the first and the 4th factors are missing. All right. Again, what I would encourage if you're new to these teachings on karma, it might be worthwhile to go to the FPMT the shop.fpmt.org, and you can look up this little file of these 10 non-virtuous actions and download it. And I think you may even be able to get it for free. You can make an offering to FPMT if you'd like. But it's a nice little booklet that goes through all of these and the various results of them. I'm going to talk about the results later. Let's go back to our text and see what we can, if I can get the screen to change on this. Let's see. Are we back at taking of lives?
Yes.
Okay, good. So we have talked about everything that makes an act complete. Let's go through what Venerable Rendawa talks about in terms of each of these 10. The taking of lives. The object for the act of taking lives, as we just saw earlier, is a living being, though again, more specifically, other than yourself. It is called an unerring conception when the person who does the killing conceives of the being as a living thing and possesses as well an unmistaken conception of it as the one that that being desires to kill. So we have to have that again, proper conception. The arising of the thought, I shall kill this creature, on the basis of the above conception, is the intent to kill the creature. This person's being overcome by any of the three root poisons of desire and so on, and formulating his or her mind in this manner is the mental affliction, right? If with such an intent and afflicted mind, either this person or through his or her inducement, another attempts to kill the particular being by such means as striking it with a weapon, and the creature should die immediately as a result of this effort upon being struck, for example, the karmic path is completed at that very moment. If the being should die at some later period, through the effect of the effort, the karmic path is completed at the time of death. This was all stuff I explained earlier. Killing is generally used as the example when we go through these things as well, because it's the most serious of the 10. It is the one that we should be trying to avoid as much as possible. Intentional killing, really, where we are intending to kill a being. If you're walking through the field in summer and you know that creatures are going to be under your foot when you do the best to avoid them, you're not accumulating the karma of killing them because you're not intending to take their lives. It's very important that we avoid killing because it is the most serious of these. Number 2, stealing or taking what is not given. The object for the act of taking what is not given is property retained by another person. The conception is to recognize the object as being such. The intent is the desire to appropriate it. The mental affliction is any of the three poisons. And the finalization is the removal of that property to another location. It's kind of interesting. Different texts will say it slightly different. I think in the FPMT publication, it actually says that you think the object belongs to you at that time. Removing it from the location is generally a part of it, right? Because if you go to somebody's house and you admire something that they have and you abscond with it, well, you take it, but it's the real thought of this is now mine. It's not like you borrowed it to show it to somebody and then you're taking it back. You have to have that thought that completes the whole act of stealing, taking something. Sexual misconduct, or what I prefer to call inappropriate sexual behavior. This is where we get into stuff that it might be a little bit hard to kind of get our heads around. Maybe before we go into this, I do want to make a little comment on my understanding based on the work of a really wonderful Buddhist teacher, who actually happens to be gay as well. And his name is Jose Ignacio Cabezon, and he's done a lot of research. He was one of the main university professors at UC Santa Barbara in Buddhism. And he has put together a whole book actually on sexuality in Buddhism, how it is taught, and various research he's done. Many years ago, there was a meeting between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and a number of gay and lesbian Buddhist practitioners who approached the Dalai Lama with the idea of why in so many Tibetan Buddhist scriptures in particular and texts is it spelled out often where homosexuality is talked about as being a non-virtuous act. And of course, we're going to get into the details of all of this. It's not to say that just homosexuality, there's many other iterations of sexual behavior that are also included and also therefore said to be a complete act of sexual misconduct. Well, His Holiness said, first of all, he's not intending to induce any kind of homophobia or anything. It's not like that's something against, or that the Buddha has anything against anyone who's lesbian, gay, what have you, all the various iterations of the alphabet, LGBTQ plus, whatever. But rather that, in his estimation, and this is again the Dalai Lama's point of view, the main culprit behind so much of our suffering is desire, right? And sexual desire is a part of desire. And if we look at it from the point of view of it all having a flavor, any sort of sexual behavior where we are trying to satisfy our sexual urges and desire, it all falls into the camp of some form of non-virtuous behavior. And so he was skirting the issue to some degree, but he did say to those people who were gathered with him, if you can go back and do more research as to where these teachings came from, then he would certainly be willing to put that in front of a council of Buddhist teachers, senior teachers from various traditions to see whether there can be some consensus as to whether this was more of a cultural phenomenon that occurred or whether it's actually something that the Buddhists taught right down to the letter. Well, according to what I understand of Jose Ignacio Capason's research, he found that a lot of the strictures, the rules, and ways of approaching non-virtue for laity actually came out of the monastic Vinaya, the rules for monks and nuns. And of course, for monks and nuns, there's no sexual behavior at all, right? That's the point of becoming a nun, or at least one of the main vows, is you shut off the lay life in terms of your clothing, your hair, your engaging in sexual behavior, owning possessions, all these various things, that when you take full ordination, you're kind of shutting the door on so many of the things that lay people, householders, have in their lives. And it seems from, again, Jose Ignacio Capason's research, that a lot of these rules came out of that type of environment. That they took what was true for monastics of avoid all of these things. And essentially, as I understand it, and again, this is my own interpretation, but it seems like they had to leave some room for procreation, right? Because you can't say that everyone should abide by no sexuality whatsoever, because stop making humans, right? I not that you're ever going to get everybody on the planet to take that vow, but the point is that you have to leave some room for procreation to occur because the human rebirth is a good rebirth. It's an ideal place to be, right? So it seems like when you look at these teachings, it's almost like everything except procreative sex is in some form of a non-virtuous category and potentially a complete path of action that could take one to the lower realms. Of course, I think again, my own approach to this, being a gay man myself, is to take it with a grain of salt to some degree and say, well, I see the dangers that desire has in my life. Nonetheless, if I'm going to be a responsible partner of a relationship where both parties are respectful of each other, committed to each other, and so on, regardless of gender, that is okay. That is all right. And I'm doing the best that I can. And I don't need to be too concerned about ending up in a hell realm on the basis of types of behavior that are set out in these texts. Again, His Holiness has never had the chance that as I understand it, to revisit this whole topic. But it does seem that a lot of the research points to the monastic Vinaya simply being overlaid for the lay practitioners, with the idea that we have to create some room for conception to occur. If conception can occur, then how do we propagate the human race? How do we actually allow for that? I don't know. There are going to be more questions, I'm guessing, after I go through this. But let's go through what is said in this section because I think it is, this is the standard line that is given in almost all Tibetan Buddhist texts. What's interesting is you don't see them carried over into other Buddhist traditions in the way that they're presented here often. The object for the act of sexual misconduct can be any of the following, and this is set out in terms of from the perspective of a male person. It is therefore for a man, a woman with whom it is improper to engage in sexual activity, such as one's daughter, one's mother, and so on, all these things that, are obviously verboten. A woman with whom sexual activity might otherwise be permissible, but where the part of the body, the place, or the time is improper. Again, when you get to the parts of the body, that's where in heterosexual male-female coitus, they say essentially that's it. You have to have those two organs involved, no mouths, no hands, nothing that would be other than those two organs. And then the place would be only in appropriate places, not near a stupa or holy objects, not in a house where you're in a room next to like your lama, your guru or something. I mean, they do give these very specific places that hopefully most of us already avoid. or the time is improper, such as when our partner has the 24-hour vows of avoiding sexual behavior. That would be an inappropriate time. Again, so it's still set out very much as a heterosexual thing of a man with a woman, but it has to be using only the parts of the body and the place and the time where it's proper to do so. And then, of course, for a man, it's set out very clearly here that the inappropriate sexual behavior would be another male or a sexually deficient person, which is a strange translation of the term. It essentially means someone whose sexuality is not defined. There are some people who are born with kind of you have hermaphrodites, but you also have like people without any real specific gender. And so essentially those are the ones that we would not be able to engage in sexual behavior with if you're a man. It seems, though it's often not set out this way, that you could flip-flop it for a woman. However, it doesn't seem that that's always the case. So again, these things, as I understand it, again, based on the research that has been done, do seem to be just a way of really detailing things that I don't think you can find in a Buddhist sutra. I don't think they've ever actually found a discourse of the Buddha where he says these things. A lot of this, once more, came out of clarifying the Vinaya and the rules for lay people on the basis of the rules for monastics. And again, they're not rules, they're just behavior that we should do our best to avoid, or at least recognize the danger of all of our acts of desire, particularly sexual desire. Okay, so let me finish off this and then I'll take it off and we can see if there are questions. The conception is to recognize unerringly any of the mentioned objects as being such, right? What were just mentioned in that previous paragraph. The intent is the desire to have sexual intercourse or some sort of sexual activity. The mental affliction is as before, and the finalization is for two such individuals to make physical contact. Now, in some texts, it will actually go so far as to say that the culmination, the finalization, is when orgasm has occurred. But in this text, and in some of the, like Lama Tsongkhapa's text, it just simply is when contact has occurred, when you've engaged in that sexual behavior of the pleasure of touch, that through the touching of the genitalia, the hands, mouth, whatever it is that is involved. I don't want to go into too much detail, obviously. So any questions or comments on this? I hope I've explained it in a way that allows us to have a bit of kind of flexibility in our minds around it and not get too caught up in kind of the words. Yes, Eloise, please.
When I was at Deer Park
Mhm.
studying with Geshe Sopa, just almost all of his close students were lesbian or gay.
Mhm.
I mean, he was really surrounded, and and when the question was brought before him, he said that what he really thought that sexual misconduct came around when it was somebody else got hurt by it.
Right.
That it was inappropriate if somebody like sleeping with your best friend's husband or doing, whatever, where somebody is going to be hurt by the act.
Mhm.
And that's how pretty much where the bubble that he wrapped around sexual misconduct.
Right. And I appreciate you sharing that, Eloise, because again, when we go back to the Buddha's teachings on morality, almost all of it can be boiled down to that concept of ahimsa, non-harmfulness. When we're harming other beings, then obviously we're engaging in unskillful actions, especially if we have the intention to harm other beings. When our behavior doesn't harm others, then generally we don't have that accumulation of negativity. Right? I agree with that. I did want to share as part of this. Thank you for kind of reminding me of Geshe Sopa because I have his book here, but I didn't get a chance to share this that I had made a note of on this section. This is pages 42 and 43. He says, the purpose of the teaching on sexual misconduct is to contain wild and extreme desire. When your desires are out of control, you go after all the sexual partners you can reach. As a practitioner, your goal is to eliminate or at least reduce your desires for sensual pleasure. Because sexual activity can lead to even more desire, you intentionally try to curtail it. This is about training yourself gradually, eventually culminating in complete celibacy. Traditional Vinaya texts offer a list of types of sexual misconduct that pertain to sex even with your own partner or spouse. First, it's not proper, da, da, da. He goes into all this and he says, traditionally, it is taught that a person should not have sex with another person of the same sex. Given the last stricture, a lot of people ask me if this means that same-sex relationships are wrong. There are different cultural contexts, customs, and perspectives about sexual relationships, so lay people today should act in the best and least harmful way that they can. The logical limitations on sexual conduct for heterosexual relationships also apply to same-sex couples. Of course, celibacy is best for working toward freedom from the mental afflictions. But if you can't completely avoid sexual contact, you should try to control yourself in a simpler way. There are many levels of virtuous conduct. You start with rough limitations on negative actions, move on to intermediate, and then gradually add more and more subtle limitations. So he got to that point eventually, yeah, of saying it really does come down to refraining from harm, as much as possible, but recognizing that this bucket of sexual activity is a difficult one for people, right? And many people do get lost in that. And hopefully, as practitioners, we're able to have a bit more control over that, a bit more awareness that desire is a problem for us. We're in the desire realm. Desire is one of the main culprits in terms of the delusion. So we shouldn't be just blindly following our desires. But within a healthy relationship, regardless of who is involved, the partners, the people in terms of their gender, their identified gender, their gender expression, whatever all these terms now that we're using, it's important that there be some kind of real respect and non-harm going on there, that we're genuinely treating the other person with consideration and care, as opposed to the types of behavior that, again, we can see very clearly are destructive. So I agree that at some level we can take it down to that very common level of, is there harm going on or not? But we also have to watch the harm that we might be doing. Because, for example, somebody could feel like, well, I'm not really harming anybody because I'm single and I'm having lots of sex with lots of other single people who are happy to have sex with me, right? Well, maybe we've all been there at some point in our life, maybe not as extreme as that, but nonetheless, that doesn't mean that engaging in that type of behavior isn't harmful in some way, because it's harmful to us to continually be following sexual desire and to become kind of a sexual addict, if you will. And that does happen in our society too. So I think we have to be careful about, again, look at our own minds and also look at our behavior. We're at 7:30. My gosh, where did the time go? I was hoping to cover 10 of these in one night, but we didn't get to it. So what I would encourage you to do, almost all of you have some sort of Lamrim text, liberation in the palm of your hand, what have you, is read up on these 10 there as well, because there's very brief descriptions of these 10 that go through like the next page as well. And then we'll kind of move on. I don't want to get too bogged down, and the remaining ones are perhaps not as controversial as what we talked about tonight. But nonetheless, if you can do some additional reading, then maybe I'll be able to kind of move through, or if you even get the FPMT, that publication again, that's called The 10 Non-Virtues. And I can put that link in the chat box, the main, unless somebody has put it there already. But anyway, it's shop.fpmt.org. I think that it will get you there. Okay. All right, any final questions before we conclude tonight? I just want to go back to reiterating that why we're spending even some time, why Venerable Randawa and of course Nagarjuna in his text talks about these 10 virtuous states of mind that are eliminating the 10 non-virtues, is because this is really the heart of our practice. Morality is the fundamental practice. I remember the first time I started working with people in an interfaith organization, and you deal with this to some degree from some other faith traditions where they think if you don't believe in God, what's your basis for practicing morality? I think perhaps we have an even stronger basis for practicing morality in Buddhism by having karma, as having this, like, everything we do has ripening into various experiences. And certainly some of our actions produce much more prominent experiences in our lives, such as entire rebirths and so on. But we have absolutely the compulsion to follow good morality, to make sure that we actually, move in the right direction, regardless of, not having a belief in a creator God, because we're the creators of our experiences. Means we have to be even more meticulous, I think, in my mind, in paying attention to what's going on, how I think, how I speak, how I act, and making sure that I avoid, again, what is harmful. So, all right, was there anything else? I know, Mary, you shared something in, the foundation store. Great, FPMT. Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and do our prayers then. Mary, if you wouldn't mind putting those on the screen, and Jana's going to lead us in those.
Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. We'll do the long life prayers for our teachers, beginning with His Holiness Dalai Lama. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And for Osulhita, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. And for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request, while striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples.
And then we do have a dedication list that circled here. What's the word for it? Anyway, Estella is going to read those names. Do you want to, would you mind standing up, maybe coming closer to the microphone here? Do you need some additional light?
For obstacles, Gina, Robin C., Yvonne, Joaquin. For illness, Jane, Rolf, Joanne, Rosemary, Elena, Ken, Clara, Yvonne, Don, John, Jana. For death, Eve Dubler, John, Elise, the man who jumped, Bill Woodall, and Bonnie B.
If there are any more names to add, you can do that at this time. But through the power of what we have done here tonight, we dedicate for the welfare of these beings who are on the list, all those that we're holding in our hearts at this time, so they may be free from their suffering and find true peace and happiness. And may all beings have those same results through what we have done here together tonight. Thank you all. I appreciate you bearing with me as we go through this text. It always does take a lot longer to explain things than what I think it will, but we'll move along, and there'll be some sections where perhaps we won't go into quite as much detail. But as I was saying, this is really the heart of our practice, is good morality. So it is important that we spend a little bit of time really defining what that is. So Thank you all. Have a good week. I'll see you all next Thursday.
Thank
Very
you.
well.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Nava.
Thank you.